Welcome back, friends. Today's episode is perfect for anyone navigating the challenging transition from a high-powered career, having ambitious career goals, to the high demands of parenting. You'll listen in to a parent just like you, offering real-life insights and practical tips on finding this new sense of self. Our guest, Jountia Boiles, shares her story of navigating the challenges of motherhood while grappling with this loss of her former professional identity. We explore how she managed to find a new sense of self through communicating with her partner, practicing self-love, embracing therapy, and understanding this evolving nature of her new identity. So whether you're a new parent or someone going through a major life change, you're going to appreciate this episode and really enjoy the relatable insights and down-to-earth conversations. Also, let us know with a 5-star review and comment how this helped you. We would really appreciate it so much more than you know. So thank you again for listening, and let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the Phantom Cries Are Real postpartum podcast, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Allie Buchanan, and I'm beyond excited to bring you tools and tips to help you thrive, not survive, in the 4th trimester. Because let's face it, postpartum is forever, and we shouldn't be doing this alone. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Allie B. So excited to bring Jountia on our podcast today, and we are going to talk about that transition of being a mom and balancing returning back to work, and also talking about how we can reconnect with ourselves and really finding how to get back to ourselves and losing ourselves and that whole journey and what that entails. So Jountia, she's a mom of a very high energy little girl who just turned 5. So congratulations. That's pretty big to get out of like the 3, 4, it's like, no, you're not a toddler anymore. It's like big kid time.
Yeah.
And she's married to her best friend. They live in a small town just outside of Austin, Texas. And again, we're so thrilled to have you on the Phantom Cries Are Real postpartum podcast. We'll just jump right on into it. Like, what was your biggest obstacle when you first had your daughter?
I think probably just like, other than just being life turned on its head and like, what is life at this point, and just figuring out the newness of all of that, and on a lack of sleep and just all of that comes with it. I think a lot was just like trying to figure out how to go from there. I think on a personal level, my partner was only home for less than a week, and he worked in service industry at the time and had to go back to work a few days after I had her. And just kind of navigating that whole first part. I'd went from a very high demand job into being on leave with a baby, and it was very different. I was working in the medical field and was on call more than I was not on call, basically. So working normal full-time hours, and then I was on call that last month. I had her on the 20th, and I was scheduled to be on call, I think, like 23 days that month. And I was actually on call the night I went into labor. So
of course you were. Of course.
Yeah. So after working a full day shift. And so it was just like that navigating from having that really high demand, busy, full life when it came to like my professional career into, okay, that's completely on the back burner now. Now you have this brand new infant, and let's figure out what is life from here. And so I think I went from like one consumption of life being career to consumption of, I have a baby, let's keep her alive, let's make sure she's thriving, everything's going well, and getting all the needs in. And so I think I breastfed, and so that was like a big thing too, was like making sure I had a supply for her. She was thriving, doing well. She was, like I said, she's super high energy. She's still like, has always been that way, even from an infant. And I think it's because I don't know, people say like when babies are in the womb, I've heard it said that sometimes if that mom or the person that's pregnant with the baby is super active, the baby's going to be super active versus like more stagnant. And I don't know how much truth there is in that, but I did not rest while I was pregnant at all. I just was like 100 miles per hour. And so the kid, like, my daughter is like eyes open, And people
Like,
are like, oh, they'll meet her. She's, did she have like some sugar or something? Like, no, that's her all the time. That's her. It's just my kid. So,
was she also like high touch, like wanted to move a lot and like be on you a lot?
yeah. She was very like those early months, contact naps, like could not put her down. Navigating that whole part of new parenthood for sleep was really challenging for us. The whole, like, of course, wanting to follow standards and making sure she's safe, and that nature of things was of course there, but like the whole layering flat on her back, she's
Didn't
like,
work.
no, that's not happening.
Yeah, didn't
So,
work. Same.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
my first was just like, what are you doing? Why are you putting me down? And then, well, I'm, I have two boys, so my second could sleep. You could put him down any way, shape, or form, and I was like, is that how it was supposed to be? Like, is that what people tell you is supposed to happen? And yeah, it does. It makes you question a lot when you're in it and you're going through it, because you're just like, well, my baby's crying, like I just need to pick them up, or all of these things, and it's really hard to discern that, like what information's out there, what I want to do for my family and my kid, and then like my mental health, like this is also going to help me,
Yeah.
because I'm helping baby. That's really tough. And so your partner went back 1 week right after.
Yeah.
You know what? I talk about that, like, because sometimes if it's not that soon, sometimes it's like even 2 or 3 weeks where you will, it's very minimal time frame that some folks get that. What was that like?
It was very, I didn't know what to expect. So just for some backstory, I am 14 years older than my only sibling. I was very involved with raising him. My mom and his dad split up like within a couple months after him being born. And so I was, until I moved out of the house and away from Washington State where I grew up down to Texas back then, um, they, I essentially was there for him when I was in the household. I was with him as much as she was because she was in college or she was working. She was super busy trying to provide and figure out like her next path in life. And so I felt like I had this sense of like, I know what parenthood is from that experience and I can do this. And I did not understand the nuances of like, I remember getting woke up in the middle of the night and having, when he would wake up and cry as an infant, but not those details of being like the person to care for the kid in the middle of the night, which is much different when you are the parent. And so it was definitely eye-opening in that way. I also, like I said, I breastfed, and so I feel like those overnight things, like I took that role. I was that overnight. He went back to work so soon. So I think there was a lot of like, it felt imbalanced at the time, just as far as responsibilities, but also knowing, hey, he's back to work and supporting him in that too. And so I think that was just, it was a lot of communication and just trying to over communicate. And it's still like just navigating through all the newness of it was just, it was a lot. Thank goodness he only worked, I think it was like 3 to 4 days being in service industry. So it wasn't like your 5 days. And you're up all hours with a newborn and it doesn't really matter. And his work was really supportive of him being a new parent, and it went great as much as it could as far as like that front, but just it was a lot. So I'm like thinking
Yeah,
that,
for sure. And like, especially since it was only 1 week, like you didn't really have to get used to like a dual, like a, for overlapping for a lot of time. So, I mean, not saying that that was better or anything, but like you had to do it from the get. And if you're thinking about bringing somebody in, I usually say like, try and, if there's somebody's going back to work transition, bring somebody in at that point, whether it's your family, that's, they're booking their flight and staying there with you, or if you can get a doula or a newborn, a nanny or something, like pay for your sleep, like
Mm-hmm.
what is your sleep worth?
Yeah.
Like, what is your mental health worth? Like,
Yeah.
maybe dropping $300 for that might do you good. We had that too. Like, what we had, I think it was, we had like 3 weeks postpartum with my husband, and like, I remember just like that fear, like that first, like, oh my gosh, my first day alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I going to be able to do that? Did you go back to your previous job? You didn't.
Mm-mm. No, I took my whole maternity leave and I extended it. Once I started thinking, I was like, the whole like trying to like breastfeed, and I was like, okay, pumping, and just the mixed signals I was getting as far as what I was supposed to do. My daughter was in that category of failure to thrive, which just that whole it. And if you look at her charts her whole life, she's always been in like the 10 percentile for her weight and the 90 percentile for her height. Always. Like she's tracking on both the whole time. But having that title and that in my head was just like, okay, how do I do this? And I was like thinking of like going back to work, being on call, having to figure out how to make sure she's getting her needs met for her food supply. I was like, I cannot do this. And the type of call I was on when you got paged, whenever I had my page, I had to be in the lab in my sterile scrubs, having my equipment on, and no less than 30 minutes ready to do a case. Because I worked for like people having heart attacks, so we had to be there immediately. Like we'd get the call when ambulances were out with whoever the patient was, and having to take care of them. And time is so important in those type of cases. And so I was like, how do I do that? And even finding a nanny or some form of a caretaker that could be on call in that manner as well, and that expectation. Okay, I call you. You need to basically be getting in the car and coming here right now. Unless like living outside my door, like, come here. Yeah. we need help. We need help now.
Like bat signal now.
So, and thank goodness at that time I only lived, I think it was 3 blocks from the hospital I worked at. So it's like I could walk over there if I needed to for a case. I generally drove, but I just was like, I can't do this. This is not. I did work with. Yeah, I worked with one person. She had come back while I was pregnant from her leave, and she was a nurse on the team that I worked with, and I don't know how she did it. She did it, and she came back, and I was just like, I can't do this. My team knew like I'm on leave, and I kept saying, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do the call, y'all. I can't. Like, I was like looking into nannies and trying to figure that out, and that was a major barrier there. And so I ended up leaving my position at the end of my leave, and so I ended up taking almost, it was like 4.5 months off after having her. And I went back into work in general urgent care as an x-ray tech. And that schedule worked really well for me. It was a rotating type of schedule where it was like the opposite one week versus the other, and would rotate. So every other week you'd have the same. So I'd get these long 4 days off every 2 weeks. And I really enjoyed that. The one thing my husband and I did that financially it made the most sense to us at the time was we worked opposites of each other. So we could not have to pay quite as much in childcare, not have to be, especially with the hours. I worked 12s and be 8 to 8 hours and 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then him being in service industry. So like going in at 3 o'clock and not getting home until 1 or 2 in the morning. It just was hard to conceptualize. How do we make the traditional childcare options out there work for us? We had one lady, she was great, that nannied for us every other weekend that I needed her, essentially. And that was it. And she followed us, like when we moved from Hillsborough to the east side of Portland, like she followed us, and she still would like care for my daughter until the pandemic happened, which was like a blessing in disguise because my husband's in service. So he got furloughed and got some really like close, valuable time with our daughter.
Yeah.
So
you got to make up time. Oh,
so they're so close. And I remember it being so scary for him, but at the same time, it was like time he would have never had otherwise. And so we definitely were counted like the positives out of such a scary time that was for so many people. So
when did you guys have to have that talk of the daycare like returning to work? Like, was it really early on, or were you just realizing like towards the end, like I can't go back?
it was, I would say probably like halfway into my leave, I just started like vocalizing, like, I don't see how this type of work that I've done prior is going to work with life as it is now. Like, how do we make this work? And just trying to figure that out and start like talking to different people I knew that were in the same field and what did you do, and looking at the options that were out there. And yeah, it was definitely in the back of my head, like, okay, we got to figure this out. What are we gonna do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad that you felt like you could have that conversation, because
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people just feel like they're like forced into, like, well, I have to do this
Yeah.
and I have to go back, and it's like, well, take some time, like evaluate that and see, because sometimes, even if daycare does fit, it can be expensive, and like look at your books and be like, sometimes you're going back to work to pay for daycare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, we can, that's a whole nother discussion about childcare and daycare in this country, but it's good that at least you guys had that open communication, because that's so important, especially in those early days. Citing that. Wow. You do you want to go back, or are you like, nah, I'm still good?
If I were to do that type of like that specific cath lab work again, it would probably be like my daughter in high school, where she can drive herself and a lot more like just independent on her own. I don't understand, like, that there was people that I worked with on my team that had multiple little ones. I'm like, how do you do this? And it's just, but a lot of people were also, everybody was out of the nest, and they were like, everybody had been out of the nest for a while, or they were right out of school and didn't have families, or just they had chose not to have children. And so the one person I remember who had multiple children, like his wife was a stay-at-home wife, and so I think that just like the dynamics worked really well, where he was in the lab all the time. But some people can make it work. For me, I was just like, nope. And at this time, I have no interest in going back to that field at the moment. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Very rewarding, because you see people coming in having a heart attack, and you go in and you support the team, and you get Stenson, and you can see people like immediately making rebounds from where they were at. And so it was very fulfilling in that way. But it was also really just a high stress type of environment as well. So.
Okay, Shantae. So you decided to leave your old job. Schedule was too busy, and now you're realizing like, oh my gosh, I have to take care of this little one, like the balance. How did you feel in balancing, like, kind of what that was before, before baby, and like finding yourself after baby?
I think like it's really hard, and I think just being aware of how much things change is really, really important. And as those transitions happened, I think it was very survival like for myself. And I got a job at a place that I'd worked at prior and left on good terms, and I was like, I know I can do this, we'll make this work. And I enjoyed it. And then I found another job that I really just like jumped into and was very passionate about, very like just loved the values and mission of the company. And when that happened, I had gone from like, I was very consumed of I'm mom. I remember my first interview, like I'm backtracking here. I remember my
No,
first
you're fine.
after having her, when I decided I wasn't going to go back to the cath lab, and I had an interview with another place, and I was actually talking to my girlfriend about this the other day, because the people that interviewed me were probably like, why is she even here? And I generally interview very well. I don't get hung up on questions and things like that, and I don't get nervous. And so I I went into this interview and I remember I was like, okay, got to get a job. I'm in healthcare. If my job's going to be better for health benefits, things of that nature, than my husband's job. And I was like, okay, you go into this job. And I'd been doing x-ray at that point for probably like 5 years. And so I'd had a decent background in it. And I went into this job and they were just asking me your typical job interview questions. And every single answer was all about my daughter. It was just what's important to you, like being able to have time, like I'll get the job done, and like just being professional, but like so focused on like I am a mom now. This is my daughter is my life. And I just retrospectively look back at it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is probably like the worst interview ever. And why isn't she just at home with her kid?
Did you get the job?
No, I did not get that job.
Oh no. So you were just like, bleh.
Yeah, it was, and I remember being so excited about the interview and going home and talk to my husband about it, and he was just like, well, I think you were just talking a little too much about your time. But you're going from having these several months of like just being mom, and that is life, and then okay, back into the workforce, and it was hard to switch that like from mom to professional, those different hats that we wear as parents. And I think like that balance, like I've always struggled with balance. I am an extreme person, like in extreme in many ways. It's like all or nothing. It's like 150% or nothing. And it's just finding balance. And it's something that I've been personally working on for several months now, but that's my nature. And I think I went from like mom, once I got into that I was in that first job after motherhood for a year before I found the next role that I was with for several years. And that role, that became me. That's what I found my identity in my work, and was overachiever. I've always been an overachiever, but I wouldn't let that slip when it was like came to home life. But I think that balance of like from being at work and turning it off to being at home and being parent, but also partner, like it was a lot. It was a challenge. And it definitely, like, it's taken a lot. Still, there's a lot of work to do there, but I'm constantly like, that's probably one of the biggest challenges I think about parenthood, is like trying to not lose yourself in the process, which I definitely did. Like, who is Jountia? Like this, yes. I was just like, what do I like? What do I get joy out of? And so I've been definitely working on that. I've been going to therapy for several months now, and self-love is definitely something that like, that was like, oh, it doesn't, like, what do I need? What fills my cup? That was not on the radar. It was making sure my kid's taken care of, making sure partner's taken care of, and making sure the job was taken care of. And oh, Jountia needs that. Okay, we'll get to it later. Yep. So I think that's definitely probably like the hardest part of all with becoming a parent. And I think it's a daily thing of making sure that I am filling my cup so I can fill in all those other areas. And so it's I can't say enough about like just prioritizing that time for yourself and being able to make sure you're getting the things that fuel you as well. And I think the hard thing for me is like in my brain, I'm like, I'm doing the things I need for myself traditionally, because I'm one of those like checklist people. Check it off, check it off, check it off. And I'm doing it for the sake of checking it off. I'm not doing it because it fills my cup. And I work out because I'm like, oh, I checked it off. I did my workout. Not because I'm like going out there to really enjoy moving my body, letting my mind relax and being in the moment. It was just like to do it, to check it off.
And then on to the next instead of being present. And I think like what you talked about too with like having the identity of work, I struggled with that as well, because I think like, because taking care of a baby is something we have to throw our whole selves into, but it's not really like rewarded and or like validated. And like when I went into work and I would get kudos, or I would get the promotion, or I would get, you know, whatever, the accolades, it was like my work is validated. And it was a different validation than, okay, yeah, my kid hugs me and gives me a kiss, like that's sweet, but it's like, yeah, that's love, you know. And
Yep.
I lost myself in that way. Like I threw myself into work, so I was like, well, I'm getting validated. And but like I had to look at that and like, okay, Allie, like where else can I validate myself? You know, where else can I take time for myself? And then, you know, how, or even like involving, now I do a lot of like my self-care. I used to just be like, well, I need to do it all by myself. Now I like try and incorporate my kids, like, hey, like mommy's gonna go do yoga. Do you wanna like come on the mat with me? Or like, hey, let's do family walks. Like everybody go out, everybody move their body. It's really nice that, and I hope that you could do this too, but like evolving my self-care practice over time of like, okay, I don't have to isolate. I don't have to be like in this silo and like solo, because that's not necessarily filling my cup. Because then it's like I'm going to that checklist, like, okay, I did my solo self-care,
Yes.
and now I have to go to the family, and it's like check, and it's like, no, like how can we rethink this? How can we redo it? It's still a struggle, but yeah, it's important to be open and evolve, like just change, be flexible with yourself, give yourself grace on that.
Yeah.
Always say that, but like I've definitely evolved over time with that too. Like just figuring out like, okay, yes, I'm a mom. I want to be, you know, like, yes, I'm a professional, and, you know, yes, in my past life, I was an academic, and, you know, like all these things. And it's like, where am I now? Where am I going to be too? That's just
I think another thing too with parenthood that I just like encourage like any of my friends that are having kids, or anybody that I talk to that hasn't had a child yet and they're like expecting or going down that journey, is the asking for help. Like, I know I was told so many times, but that's not my nature either. I'm like, you pull those bootstraps up and you get through it and you do it, and it's going to be tough sometimes. That's like my mentality. But I think there was so much more opportunity for help than I allowed myself to see. And it would have made it so much more enjoyable along the way had I like asked for it and just put that part of my ego down. Like, you know, these people want to help, and allowing people in to help and just vocalizing those needs. So
getting your needs met, a battle for sure, because you're just so in a fog in it.
Yep.
And sometimes you don't even realize, like, I tell, whenever we have our classes, I tell the partners all like, don't ask. Don't ask. Like, if you ask, oh, do you want me to take care? You want me to hold the baby? Like, you know, our first go-to, no, we're okay. I'm fine. We're always going to default. No, I got it. I'm good. Like, just, hey, I'm going to take the baby and go change the diaper. Why don't you go get a shower?
Yeah.
Because at that point you're like, oh, that's a good idea. You know, like you're getting reminded, like, yeah, I do. I probably should shower. Like, you know, it doesn't work all the time, because sometimes people are like, well, I don't need, you know, but typically if you can work that communication out of being like, hey, let me just do this thing instead of asking. Because when you ask, we start thinking in a different part of our brain versus like the command of it. And it's a big psychology thing. It stinks, but it does. It's really hard to accept help. It really is. Like, if the help was there, like sometimes I would take it, sometimes I wouldn't. I mean, let's be honest. Because like I was like, I don't even know what I need help with.
Yeah.
you know, like, I don't even know. And then also, like, back then, I mean, my oldest he'll be 8 this month. And, you know, like, I had no idea what a lactation consultant was. Like, I didn't know what a doula was. Like, sometimes you just don't know what's out there.
Yeah.
You know, you're just like, I just go to the pediatrician.
Yeah.
That's the only person that I have contact with.
Yep. And I think I've chatted with some people at the time. I remember being like pregnant, and I knew I wanted to try, like, I had this idea of like, this is how my journey's going to go. And I remember a few people saying, you should really look into getting a birth doula. And I was like, okay. And then I just financially, it was like, okay, I don't know if that's possible. And so I didn't even like look into it. And so I kick myself now because I'm like, it would have made the experience so much better. But now it's like, so if that experience ever happens, I definitely will have a birth doula and be looking for like support doula work and family work. Like, I didn't ask for any of that type of like support. And I think it's just like not just being over, just so busy that I didn't take the time to like step back and like realize what type of resources were available. Yeah, because beyond the pediatrician and beyond the new parent group that I went to, those were like my main things that I had. New parent group was so important for me too, because like with my partner going back to work, it was just, I didn't have any immediate family where we were at. And I know my mother-in-law, she came and stayed, I think it was like 5 weeks after we had my daughter. And she was there for, I think, 2 weeks. She flew in 2-3 weeks and she stayed with us. And that was really nice. But at the same time, it's just, I think when you bring other people in, there's those differences on like how you should be doing things. And like, there was already those circumstances that you're struggling with. And like for us, it was the feeding, and just there's these other like just concepts of things going in, and it's not feeling as supportive as you would like it to, even though it's not coming from a bad place.
No.
Everybody's just wanting to like help and support, but it's challenging. It's so like, and like in that moment though, it's like you just feel like you're not being supported with like what you're trying to do at that moment. And if I go down that journey again, it's definitely just going to be asking for a lot more support along the way.
And I'll say, like, one of the tips that I give out for people that are giving unsolicited advice, like, blame a professional. So, like, if you have a doula, like, blame the doula, like, or say like, well, the pediatrician said, because then like, you know, they're like, oh, okay, like, you already know, but really that's like your preference. So like, you know, if they're saying like, well, you should put cereal in their bottle so that they can sleep longer, it's like, well, the pediatrician said that they shouldn't be doing that, and they shouldn't start, you know, cereal until like 5-6 months. Like, oh, you know, things have changed.
Yes.
So that's the tip of if you ever want to like combat somebody.
Yeah.
Because the other thing, because, you know, some people try and be like, well, I looked at this article, and then it gets into like a battle, and it's like, don't take that on. You don't have to take that on right now. Just thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. Really. Yeah. Yes. I will say I had a big anxiety thing around that with my in-laws too. Like, I could feel in my body, like, if I had to go visit, I was like, I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. Like, oh my gosh, brace yourself. Because like, especially when once we found out that we had food allergies, and we had like a whole team of like immunologists and allergists and things like that. So then I was just I was like, well, the allergist said, oh, the immunologist said, and it's like,
that is a good way around it. That's just those other things that you don't even think about until you're in the moment and the experience. But I like that idea, so definitely we'll keep that in the back of my brain. So anybody I encounter as well that is going through that, or I'm just thinking about, like, I have a girlfriend and I'm wondering if she's going through that. She just had her third baby. Her oldest is 2 weeks younger than my daughter. We were pregnant at the same time.
Aww.
Due dates were only a week apart. I had my daughter like right after my due date, and she went a little bit late. And we both lived in Portland at the time, and now we're both in Central Texas. We're less than
my gosh,
like a 25-minute drive from each otother.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she just had her third, and I'm like sitting there just thinking, I'm like, I wonder if she's struggling with that, and want to share that. Like, yeah, just say that. And
yeah. So, what meal do you want? Here's DoorDash.
Yes, definitely. She was sharing that because her partner she just had her baby. I don't remember what day she had him. I want to say he's 3 weeks old now. Her partner is taking paternity leave, I think, starting next week, which is a little bit strange, but she was sharing the reason she did that was because she knew she would have the bulk of the support from like family and friends, those beginning points. And she's like, now with her husband taking the leave, he'll be able to be home for the majority of the summer with also the other children too. And I was like, awesome. You're so smart.
Yeah, that is genius. Yes. Like, and it really, you have to take into account like the timing, like whose schedules works out, especially when you have other children. Like if they're going to be home and it's like, well, I have to manage like all of these things plus this tiny little guy. No, like that's so smart. Good for her.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Yes.
Awesome. You said 3 months.
Yeah, I think it's 3 months.
That's awesome.
It's like a good, like, if not 3, it's 2 months, but it's like a decent amount.
Whenever I hear partners like that, I'm like, you guys are like enjoy. I mean, I wish it was longer, but that's such a good time frame just to set up an established experience and really like hone in on like what works, what doesn't, and just to get through. So that's really good. Oh, I'm so happy for them. Well, Shantae, is there any last minute like words of advice that you would say to a parent that is struggling with going back to work?
Just the thing I already said, like, don't be afraid to ask for help, and you got to find out what works for you. And even though like what the immediate answer seems like this is the immediate thing that we need to do, it might be a different journey than you're expecting it to be. And so just being open to looking beyond what you're like, what's immediately in front of you. So
yes, well said. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, and I wish you all the best in Texas. If you ever come back to Portland, let me know.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You as well. Take care.
Bye. As a disclaimer, this podcast does not provide medical advice. The topics discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Please see the 40daydoula.com/disclaimer for more info.